Hello and welcome to my Let's Talk F1 2014 for the Malaysian Grand Prix, where we're going to be previewing the Malaysian Grand Prix by quickly looking back at the Australian Grand Prix in terms of the cars, how they looked, and what I thought made them fast or slow, and just looking at where they might have had troubles or successes, and then looking at the cars ahead for the Malaysian Grand Prix by looking at pictures from free practice and just seeing what I can find out around the web about what's changed on the cars and who I think will be up there for the Malaysian Grand Prix, and rounding off with my predictions and then asking about yours. So the first team we're going to go for is obviously the race winning team, Mercedes GP, with Nico Rosberg. The Australian Grand Prix was a mixed bag for Mercedes GP, with Nico Rosberg winning the race, but Lewis Hamilton having to retire after one of his pistons developed a misfire. So essentially he was running on 5 cylinders instead of 6. It was really unfortunate. I mean, it's one of these things that can crop up quite easily, especially with these new engines. Mercedes, surprisingly, have said that the engine's fine now. They fixed the issue, and they're going to be running the same engine for Hamilton and Malaysia. So I guess it's encouraging for Lewis and the team that they're able to fix the problem. They didn't have to take any sort of penalty occurring or having to swap the engine out very early at this stage for the season. But quickly looking at the Australian Grand Prix performance, Nico Rosberg dominated the race and was miles ahead of the rest and really controlled it quite well. A very, lots of people are saying Prost-like race where he just controlled things. He was even asking on the radio what I can do for reliability, guys. And just generally, just working with the engineers, an absolute treat to, really dominate this race. And Mercedes are looking very strong indeed. They've got a nice sound car, a very fast car. It's clear they're the fastest car on the grid by a mile. And it's really a catch-up game for Mercedes. Now let's quickly look at what they've brought to Malaysia. So as you can see in this picture, we've got 2 front wings of the Mercedes GP car. Now the top one on the top is the Australia spec, I believe, and the bottom one is the Malaysian one. As you can see on the top one, the reason why I think it's the Australia spec, because we can see the usual the side bits of the front wing are pretty much the same as the Australia one. I mentioned in my Australian preview about the Mercedes have got a few Lotus engineers from last year, and you can see the Lotus style kind of little flicks of the front wing on the top on the little side bits that just kind of flick up and curve left off the front wing. And the bottom one, I believe, is the new Malaysia spec, which just generally looks very different in terms of the side elements, but also the front, the actual nose bit itself. It looks like it's a lot further back and slanted a lot more steeply. I don't know if that it's maybe the angle of the photo that's it been taken that maybe makes it look like that, but it definitely looks like it's a lot more kind of a bit pushed back compared to the Australia spec, which I believe is the top one. Going back to the front wing of the Malaysia spec one, obviously this is all just kind of guesswork. I have not found any information to tell me otherwise. This is just going off what we saw from the last race. So they've gone for now. They've lost the flicks on the left that go to the left and then right on the top of those side parts, and they've kind of got a massive kind of winglet that comes across the 4-element part indeed. So I think that, as you can see where the air would kind of get channeled through that area and kind of almost go above the tyre and to the inside wall of the tyre, and even sort of outside, curving outside. And I think this wing definitely is going to suit the high-speed corners in Malaysia. There are a lot of long corners where braking is long on entry and the exit is very long as well, and I think this wing is definitely more of a Malaysia spec just looking at it, because the top one definitely looks a bit more chunkier on the front just for that kind of high downforce that you need for the Australian Grand Prix, which is a lot more of a street circuit, where this is a typical kind of normal track built circuit Malaysian Grand Prix. And I think the front wing development here is very complex, and they've completely changed it, and it does look very nice, just even if you didn't really analyze it aerodynamically. It just looks very nice. So now quickly moving on to the rear of the Mercedes car. So now I've just quickly gone in Photoshop and just drawn these yellow arrows around. Now obviously this is very dumbed down. I'm sure I could try and explain to you in complicated matters, but I'm trying to keep it simple so everyone can understand it. So basically I've just drawn where the air will be going, and the kind of resultant force is a lot of rear downforce from the Mercedes car. They've got some really nice side body work with the turning vanes making the air go round the side pods and the bottom. They've also got some nice work on the top with a few really subtle curves, and also in the rear wing itself, they've got some subtle bulges on the side, which I've not seen many teams have. I mean, if you look at a Force India, for example, you just don't see those bulges, so you can see the difference between the teams and how complex their designs go, as Mercedes got these subtle bulges that obviously you wouldn't think would work, but at high speed, the air is going so fast that these subtle little differences really do make a difference in channeling air upwards from the rear wing, and it obviously resulting in a net push down on the whole rear of the car and producing downforce. So that's been a quick analysis of the Mercedes car. Now on to McLaren. McLaren had a very impressive debut at the Australian Grand Prix, with Kevin Magnussen taking a second place, obviously a third place on track, but after Ricciardo's disqualification, he got a second place, that means, and Button effectively got a third place, although he did not step onto the podium. They had promising pace, really impressive stuff from Kevin Magnussen, and their car looked generally quite good, and, you know, it looked very quick in a straight line. The Mercedes engine obviously working well for them. But one thing that Craig Scarborough, or Scarbs F1 on Twitter, I recommend you follow him on Twitter if you're into all this aerodynamic stuff. He pointed out that the McLaren front suspension, if you can see the front suspension arms, they're pretty much flat and parallel to the ground. The front one. So what that means is that there's a lot more contact with the tyres on the ground. There's a bigger contact patch on the front tyres on the ground, which means they can get a lot more grip from the front tyres because there's more being loaded and spread out, and a lot more of the tyre being on the ground gripping to the circuit. If you compare this to pictures, if you go on your browser and whatever, if you want to look at it, if you look at other cars like the Ferrari, the Force India, the midfield teams, a lot of it, also Mercedes don't have a completely flat one. McLaren have got it really spot on. They've got a really nice flat suspension arms here, and that really helps with the contact patches. And, you know, Jenson Button's been saying that their car is very good in the slow speed corners, and it shows because it's slow speed, in corners. This sort of suspension setup and the contact patch you have on the ground is going to make a huge difference to how the car handles. On the high speed, it's not too much of a factor, and that's why the Jenson Button has said that on the high speed, McLaren is still lacking, but low speed, he says, they are very in good shape, and I think that can really make something for them at places like Monaco, Canada, just the places where you see quite a lot of slow speed corners throughout the lap. It'll really make a difference for McLaren. Now, going on to their kind of updates for Malaysia, they've actually been one of the teams that have really changed stuff for Malaysia. So let's get on to analysing the changes. So McLaren have completely changed their nose setup. As you can see, I've got a comparison now. The left is them in Jerez testing, and on the right is them at Malaysia. I've had to kind of change the contrast a bit, just so you can actually see the detail of it. It was quite it was a mobile picture from their social media, from Twitter. But as you can see, very different nose. The nose looks very elongated now, that antenna nose. And that's basically because they've sort of moved everything back a bit and raised it up. And as you can see, I don't know if I'm hoping you can see just where the Pirelli tyre is, just at that point, the bodywork of the car sort of starts to slant down and then slants back up and sort of flattens out. And that is to raise the whole profile of the car, to get a lot more air under the car. And it's thinned out on that kind of raised up bit on the front. As you can see, where the front wing sort of attached to the rest of the car, they've kind of cut away any of the metal that kind of goes onwards down through, you know, the suspension arms. They've got a really thin part there, and that allows the car to just have a higher profile and gets lots of crucial air underneath the car, which is what they're going to want to do. A lot of the aerodynamics really goes on also underneath the car. There's a lot of crucial stuff that goes right underneath where the suspensions are right underneath the bodywork, and they're going to get some crucial air work. And if you can't exactly see it now, I've got a quick diagram to explain it all. So this is a really dumbed down diagram just so everyone can sort of understand it. So on the left is the Australia spec of the McLaren, and on the right is what I've sort of, you know, looking at the quite, you know, horrible rubbish pictures off the mobile internet, and surprisingly there haven't been many pictures of the McLaren in high-res format, but what I can see is I've drawn it out like that. So basically you can see that's a much higher profile nose, and as you can see, I've kind of made sure you can see the sort of dent in the front, or the whole kind of front places. It swoops down normally and then sort of bends down and then bends back up and flattens out, and then you've got the lower nose which kind of sticks out a lot more at a sharper angle, a lot like the Toro Rosso, a lot like the Force India, and they've cut away at the rest of the metal, so you get a very thin placement of the bodywork up until the part where it gets to the rest of the chassis and the bulkhead. So McLaren have definitely gone for, I think it'll, work out for them. Obviously, it doesn't look very pretty. It looks very ugly indeed, but it gets them a lot of nice air underneath the car. And they actually did this in 2012. They have a habit of doing this, I think. They kind of start off with their kind of mantra of a low-profile car. McLaren are very good at doing that whole kind of low-profileness. They did it in 2012 where they started off with that really low nose, that really low hunkered down profile of the car. But then by Spain, you could see, even on the T-cam, it's very noticeable that you can see that the whole front of the car, instead of swooping down in a nice curve, starts to kind of bend back up and kind of have a kink in it at the very end of it to try and flatten out and raise the profile of the car. You can see it in the T-cams. If you compare the T-cams of the Australian Grand Prix to the Malaysian one, or the McLaren, you can actually physically now see the front of the car as it's raised up in, at Malaysia, whereas in Australia you couldn't because it just swooped down. So that's been McLaren. Let's move on to Ferrari. Ferrari had a mixed bag at the Australian Grand Prix. Fernando Alonso was able to take himself up to 4th place after Ricciardo's disqualification, and after that also Raikkonen got 7th place instead of 8th. They had a few electrical problems throughout the Grand Prix, a lot of electrical software issues, so I think those should be resolved for Malaysia, and definitely seen by the free practice times, Raikkonen was definitely up there, surprisingly ahead of Alonso. So it looks like Raikkonen's maybe got a bit more comfortable with the car, and he said he didn't have an issue with the brake-by-wire system. It was just the kind of software that was sort of malfunctioning and not making it a well-balanced car. But they've definitely got some promise. They need to work on maybe their fuel saving. I think it might have hampered them a tiny bit. As I said in the Let's Talk Australia, that the Ferrari engine is very thirsty. But they've got some nice developments on the car, which we'll now analyse they had it for Australia, a few of them. And I just wanted to generally analyse the Ferrari bodywork on the rear of the car to see how it might suit the Malaysian circuit. So Ferrari have this little tiny black wing right behind the little how to explain it, the TV antenna roll hoop, where you can see at the very top of the car, the top arrow where I've drawn it. You can see the little black wing that was there at Australia, and it basically makes the rear wing work harder because it channels air to the front wing directly and makes it work a lot harder, and that produces a bit more rear downforce. Not a lot, but it will just make it work harder throughout the race. And looking at it closely, the Ferrari's actually got some nice bodywork, although it may not be the best bodywork ever because they've got a kind of awkward way the side pod kind of comes out. But they've still got some nice, really smooth bodywork compared to a few other lower teams. That definitely is going to help them in terms of aero. Not as good as Mercedes for sure, and maybe not even McLaren, but a nice development from Ferrari with that little tiny little black wing on behind that little camera placement that makes the rear wing work a lot harder. So, now moving on to Red Bull. Well, Red Bull, I would have said, had a really nice weekend with Ricciardo until he got disqualified. Daniel Ricciardo getting disqualified because his fuel flow limit was reached and passed consistently throughout the race. This is not the fuel that he was allowed. He did still only use 100 kilograms of fuel. A lot of people are mistaking that, and it does annoy me a bit. It's the fuel flow, the way, how fast the fuel was flowing into his car. And that essentially means how fast the car kind of gains speed and how much reaction there is when he puts the throttle down to how much fuel gets injected straight into the engine. And that essentially, the reason why the FIA have limited that, they've said, is because if you didn't limit that, then cars could essentially really ramp up the flow rate, and they could literally slam on the throttle, really get amazing power down the straight for halfway, and then for the second half, they'd kind of lift and kind of coast, because they've already got the oomph from the higher flow rates to take them across the straight. So that's why it's limited, and the FIA have said, we're not taking any nonsense, and he's disqualified. Do tell me what you think. I thought it was very harsh on Ricciardo, but the rules are the rules. The Red Bull team need to follow the FIA's wanting. Sorry about that. It's a technical directive that the cars have to use the FIA's fuel flow meter. The rule says they can't exceed 100 kilograms per hour of flow rate, but it doesn't. It's not an actual rule that they have to use the meter. But the FIA did say to them categorically in the race, please start using our flow rates, because you know, on our readings you're going over. Red Bull obviously going to contest and say that their actual when on their data, when the fuel's being injected to the engine, said they were bang on 100. So they'll take it to the court case. I think Red Bull have a strong thing, but the biggest thing is, do the FIA actually want to really listen to it and say, okay, fine, you were going to the limit? Because if they don't, then teams might start to do this all the time, and we'll get very confusing when races are really decided hours after the Grand Prix is finished, and that's not a great thing. So now, getting away from this qualification, that's really at least of Red Bull's worries going to this next weekend now. The car looks a lot more solid than it was in testing. Australia showed some good pace. We don't know how much pace Ricciardo gained from the fuel. But overall, the car is looking pretty good still. No major changes of surprising. I haven't actually seen many major changes to the Red Bull car. Not enough for me to really, get my teeth into. So I just think it'll be another good weekend for Red Bull. I think, I say good relative to where they were. It's all relative, really. They're nowhere near the pace of Mercedes, or even indeed, I think McLaren and even Williams. I think the Red Bull, it was just kind of taken up to second place by Ricciardo and his brilliant drive, and where he was in qualifying, and because of the fuel. So we'll have to see how it goes, but that's been Red Bull. Now on to Williams. Williams had a really solid race with Valtteri Bottas getting a 5th place. It could have really been a podium because of that mistake. He hit the wall and his rear tyre came off. Very unfortunate. A driver error. He admitted to it and he said he would learn from it, which is good to see. And really, if it wasn't for that, I think he would have got a podium. And Williams really looked really fighty, really feisty throughout the race, and was overtaking quite a few cars in the middle stints. The Williams, not a lot to speak about it yet again. It's kind of annoying. I want to make these videos as good as I can, but the media doesn't like to cover as much about all the teams in depth as I would like to kind of discuss. They've only, as you can realise by now, they've only really talked about Mercedes, McLaren and Ferrari and Red Bull a bit. But, the Williams still looked very strong, and unfortunate for Felipe Massa to get knocked out at Australia. I think he's going to be really hungry to get some good points. But speaking about Massa's DNF, it is important to state that it wasn't Kobayashi's fault. It was Caterham's brake-by-wire system that broke, and that meant that the rear brakes simply weren't working, and Kobayashi had to try and stop the car with only his front brakes, which obviously was never going to work. So he completely locked up, double lock up, and slammed into Massa's Williams. Unfortunate, really, but I think Williams will have another strong weekend. Jensen Button saying there Williams are definitely faster than the McLaren. I'm not too sure. It looks at times they're faster, but at times it looks like they're pretty much on the same pace. But I do think Williams will have a good result this weekend, and I hope they get a good result, because I think they're sort of everyone's second team in a way, and it would be nice to see Massa get a few points and even maybe outscore Alonso or something and put a smile on his face. So moving on to Lotus. Lotus surprisingly finished a lot of laps at the Australian Grand Prix. More than they did in practice and qualifying, which was actually very surprising. I suspect they were running on probably about half power as they were trundling along about a lap or two down. Both in the end DNF'd, and news is not broken, but news has come out that Lotus have said that they're probably about 5 races behind in terms of they might only get back up to pace by the Spanish Grand Prix, which is really unfortunate to hear, because Grosjean, I think he deserves better really, but unfortunately these things can happen, and not too much to say about Lotus in terms of developments. They're not probably thinking about aero developments at this stage. They're really probably just thinking about how to get on top of this engine problem, because even Renault have said it's not really us now. It is Lotus's fault for not really stepping up like Red Bull did and put in the hours, because they missed that one crucial Jerez test to maybe find out about the problems earlier. Just generally not a very good race for Lotus, and I don't see it getting any better here at Malaysia, unfortunately. So now moving on to Force India. Force India had quite a solid race with Hulkenberg getting a 6th place for them, and interesting to note that the commentators said that they seem, whatever car you put Hulkenberg in, he seems to bring it to the top, and he really does. He was right there holding up Alonso and Button and a few other cars, and he was holding his own for a lot of the race until he got undercut by a few pit stops. But 6th place is really good for Hulkenberg, and compared to his teammate who only came in 11th on the track and then 10th after the disqualification, Ricciardo, Very good performance by Nico Hulkenberg. The Force India looks like a solid car, but it just didn't have enough pace in it to really challenge the cars around them, like Ferrari, McLaren, and indeed the Toro Rossos at time, and the Williams cars. But generally still very good, and I think they're in good position. I think they're going to have to really battle hard with the Toro Rosso, which surprisingly looks very good compared to what they were looking like in testing. But I think it'll be another good race for Force India. He is hoping they'll have another calamity like they did in last Malaysian Grand Prix in 2013, where they had some really major issues with wheel nuts in their pit stops. So he's hoping they can have another good result. All the other thing to note is that I was very disappointed in Perez. He just didn't seem like anywhere in the Australian Grand Prix. But Hulkenberg, yet again, has shone through, and he's showing he's got a real talent to bring, you know, maybe cars that shouldn't really be there up to good points in the front. So now, moving on to Toro Rosso. Toro Rosso, a very surprising package with 8th place Vergne and 9th place Kvyat. A very good, solid drive for the Toro Rosso boys, outscoring Red Bull, their bigger sister team, at this Grand Prix. Some solid reliability, both cars finishing in the points, and you know, just very, very impressed with them. They're doing very well. The rookie Kvyat got his first points, the youngest point scorer in Formula 1 now, eclipsing Sebastian Vettel's record now. And I got to hand it to the kid. I had my doubts about him, but he's really proven me wrong. And, you know, he's shown that he's up there with these guys, and he can take it to them and get some good points in his first race of the season, straight from GP3 to F1. Which is very surprising. Obviously, most come from GP2, but in you know, we got a GP3 guy of Kvyat coming straight up to F1. I think Bottas did that, or you can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure someone else came from GP3 straight up to F1 when they joined. But Kvyat doing a very good job. Vergne also, the car looks very good. It looks quite solid, and they've actually changed their nose. They've gone with the same thing McLaren have done, which is surprising, really, because Toro Rosso, you can see in the picture, they have a sort of kind of curved, when you know, coming from the antenna nose, they have a kind of curved up. The bodywork curves upwards and then comes down to join the front wing end plate, obviously. And they actually copied that from McLaren in testing, and they had that for Australia. And Malaysia, surprisingly, they've copied McLaren again, and they've gone with the flatter nose and a higher profile. So it looks like Toro Rosso might be looking closely at McLaren to get a few styling pointers from them for the front nose. But nothing wrong there. I mean, they're allowed to look around and gain a few things. You see lots of aerodynamicists looking up and down the grid when the cars are parked there, just looking at, especially Adrian Newey likes to poke around and just look at how all the cars are developing, see what he can nitpick from other cars, and I'm sure others do as well. But Toro Rosso, very good for me, and very surprised that they're beating Red Bull at the moment. So now on to Marussia. Marussia had a very solid drive, to be honest, with Chilton in the 13th place. Probably disappointing, as I was, you know, maybe I was maybe predicting that they might get a point, but still, 13th place. That is the place that Bianchi got at the Malaysian Grand Prix last year. That saw them get 10th place in the Constructors. And they've done it again straight away in Australia. And, you know, neither of the bottom two teams got points. So this 13th place might actually be more important than people are kind of giving Chilton credit for. And Bianchi did not finish. He wasn't classified because he was, I think, about 8 laps down. So he didn't classify, but both cars were running throughout the race. So the cars do have some sort of reliability. They had a lot of issues at the very start of the race where their engines were switching off for some reason, probably a software issue, and also some just engine teething issues. But here's hoping they can do better in Malaysian Grand Prix. But, you know, they're going to have to try and ramp up. I didn't see too many differences at Malaysia compared to Australia. But they're going to want to try and do their best, because I think the best time for them to score points is in the first 5 races. So now, moving on to Caterham. Well, Caterham had quite a bad Grand Prix with Kobayashi going straight out on lap 1, corner 1, with that brake-by-wire issue. Ericsson was actually going quite well until his engine, they had to switch the engine off. I heard on the team radio that they said Ericsson was actually doing a very nice job. They were very pleased with him. You could tell by the engineer's voice on the radio that they were very pleased with Ericsson. So I guess that's sort of promising, but 2 DNFs, not what they wanted. And they need to iron out these failures, really, to be honest, to try and gain a bit on Marussia. The thing is, they need to finish the races to even have a chance of scoring points. But again, Unfortunately, the media doesn't really like to cover all these bottom teams, so not too much to really explain to me. And also, at this early stage of the weekend, there wasn't too much to say about this team. But I think it will be probably another mediocre race for Caterham. Here's hoping they finish the race, really. So now, moving on to Sauber. And so my final team is Sauber. Don't take anything into the order I've kind of said it. I've just kind of gone randomly, if you are wondering. But Sauber, 11th place for Suttel and 12th place for Gutierrez. Both cars lapped. Suttel just saying they were far too slow, didn't have enough downforce, didn't have enough pace, and the cars just generally looked too slow, really, not good enough for points. By a long way, actually. The car just not looking very good. Maybe they have issues from the Ferrari engine, which we know is very thirsty. But overall, the car just didn't have the pace to really get into the points, and it just didn't have the downforce of the Australian Grand Prix. They may improve for Malaysia. Only time will tell as we go on this weekend. But I hope you guys have really enjoyed this aerodynamics analysis. Please do comment below if you did like it. I know a lot of you really did enjoy the Australian one that I did. And I hope that for a lot of you that maybe don't, like to read up a lot on aerodynamics and sometimes don't understand how the technology works and how the cars kind of work and why certain cars are slow and fast, hope this has really helped you to maybe gain a bit of more of an understanding of it in simple terms. So now moving on to my predictions for the Grand Prix. So here we go for the Malaysian Grand Prix predictions for my predictions for the Grand Prix. We've got the Australia results, as you can see there on the right, with the disqualification of Ricciardo yet to be decided. That will be decided in April, so after the Bahrain Grand Prix, the third race. So that will be quite interesting. But my top 3 prediction for the Malaysian Grand Prix is going to be Lewis Hamilton winning the race with Nico Rosberg in second place and Kevin Magnussen taking another good podium for McLaren. Why do I think Lewis Hamilton will win this race? Well, because he DNF'd in Australia. I think he's going to be really hungry. And I've been speaking to him and he's been very coy about everything. He's just kind of been going about his business, not saying anything to reporters. He was just kind of saying, I'm just going to stick to my own thing. I'm just going to think about it. And I think that's a very good attitude to have. And I'm actually very respect to him that he's come back, after Australia. Obviously, one could get very angry at what happened there. And he's kind of just played it cool. And I think he's going to win this race. I think it's going to be very close between Hamilton and Rosberg. But I just have this gut feeling that Lewis Hamilton is going to do it for this race. But it's going to be very close. I was very impressed by Nico Rosberg. And at this point in time, Nico Rosberg is my best bet for the championship. But we'll have to see. It's a long race. It's a long championship. So whatever I say probably is going to end up maybe tipped on his head by 3/4 of the way of the season. We'll have to see. But for this race, I think Lewis Hamilton's going to win it with Nico Rosberg second and Kevin Magnussen getting another podium in the McLaren. I was very impressed by him. Many of you who follow me already will know I'm a Jenson Button fan, and I've been following him since I started watching the sport in 2007. And he's been pretty much only my main driver. But after the Australian Grand Prix and throughout testing, I've really taken to Magnussen, not because he's a McLaren driver. I'm not actually a McLaren fan myself. In terms of, I don't root for the team because of the team. I root for the team because my driver, Jenson Button, is in the team. But I've really taken to a shine to Kevin Magnussen. So it just so happens they're both in McLaren. So it's kind of easy for me to support both of them equally. So I've definitely taken to a shine to Magnussen. And I think he's going to do another great weekend in third place. But my top 10 predictions, I'm going to say 4th place is going to be Valtteri Bottas. 5th place, Jenson Button. 6th place, Fernando Alonso. 7th place, Felipe Massa. 8th place, Kimi Raikkonen. 9th place, Sebastian Vettel. And 10th place, Daniel Ricciardo, with pole position going to Lewis Hamilton, faster lap by Lewis Hamilton, and positions gained Valtteri Bottas. Now, guys, please do comment below your top 3 predictions and even your top 10 predictions. I'd love to read them and just see what everyone's thinking in terms of the top 10. I don't know about you guys. Do comment this below. I don't know if you're finding it hard to predict the top 10 because there are just so many different drivers that could potentially do so well. I was kind of mixed, I was kind of very mixed views about where Bottas would finish and also where to put Alonso, Raikkonen, Massa, Vettel, and Ricciardo, because Ricciardo did really well. You can't deny Vettel is going to do well if his car stays there. Raikkonen looked really good in free practice 2 at the Malaysian Grand Prix. Alonso is always going to drag his car up there. Massa, what can he do in the Williams? And Bottas showed some great pace in the Williams as well. So it's very hard to kind of slot them into the top 10. It's almost like you need more points paying positions because I just couldn't decide really. It was very frustrating for me. But there you go. That's what I'm just going to go with. It's all opinion based. Please do comment below your top 10. As I want to see as many of you commenting that below as we can. And it'll be very interesting to see what will happen. And obviously I will comment below after qualifying qualifying and see what you guys think of qualifying, so we can kind of use the comment section as a nice little forum. But I hope you guys have really enjoyed this long analysis video. I know it's been another long one, but you guys really enjoyed it. Lots of you saying it's probably been my best video yet from the Australian Grand Prix, so hoping this one is even better with a lot more analysis of the aerodynamics of the cars. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Please do give this video a big massive like if you did enjoy it. Again, comment below what you need to comment below about your predictions of top 3, the top 10, and also if you did enjoy all the analysis. I've been aarava. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope you enjoyed the Malaysian Grand Prix, and I will see you guys for my next video.